Okay, so guys, please make sure that you are using this video in the way intended. We're not in class, and so you don't have me watching you and supervising you. Um, so you have to really have the discipline to really focus and use this video the way that I tell you, because if you don't, you might make life easier by not really engaging in this the way that I show you, but you're going to make today easier and tomorrow harder, because you won't really have started to build the neurons and the white blood cells necessary to create the physiological brain change needed to truly learn what is a skill. So you have to know facts, definitions for argument, statement. You have to know what a premise indicator is and a conclusion indicator is. You can know those facts. But when I tell you to analyze an argument for a grade, that is a skill. That is application. That is knowing how. So knowing definitions is low-level knowledge. But being able to apply the definition, that is higher level knowledge. And we get good at that only through practice. So that means that engaging with this activity is so important to creating the physiological brain change that is needed to be able to apply the lower level knowledge that we've been going over. You might have heard me say the word apply, right? So argument analysis involves not only taking things apart, that higher level thinking, that intellectual faculty, but also application. So you're both applying the concepts and analyzing at the same time. In other words, you cannot analyze the arguments without applying the concepts that we have gone over, without having some familiarity with the strategies. Now that said, you're always going to be able to use the lecture notes on the meaning of statement and argument and the other page of notes that we took where we wrote down the list of premise and conclusion indicators. But that's just information. If you don't truly practice and engage in this class whenever I have practice, like a video like this, then when you sit down with your notes, you're probably going to not do so well, because while you have that information, you haven't practiced applying that information to build your ability to analyze arguments like a philosopher. Now, I'm coming off as very intense and direct, as I often do, but that's because I care so much. As you guys know, I don't really think of myself as a professor. I think of myself as a coach. And so you guys are on the field, let's say a soccer team, and I want us to all reach that collective goal of doing well. So I'm very intense. I'm like on the sidelines, and I'm not yelling at you in a negative way. I'm yelling for you. I'm trying to get you to reach the objective of doing well in this class so that you can get credit for it. But I also want you to have I'm also hoping you have the deeper level goal of truly learning and refining your analytical skills, your ability to apply concepts, your ability to manifest intellectual perseverance and intellectual empathy. Okay, with that said, I will coach you through these examples and how to use this document and this video in an interactive way. All right, so let's start with argument 1. So whenever I tell you to analyze an argument, the very first thing you should do is go back to the definition for argument, because that is the general concept that you're applying. Don't rely on your memory. Our memory doesn't always remember things clearly, precisely, and accurately. So always go back to the lecture notes. You're not necessarily going to have time to reread the notes in class when you have a graded unit quiz or a graded learning or graded in-class assignment. That's why you should always review the tools, the concept of a concept, and these notes. Review them all the time before class, because you never know when you're going to need to have it fresh in your mind. That said, you will be able to use this as a resource. So we should go ahead and review argument. Now, at this point, I am going to pretend to be a student, the model student. What I have in mind in terms of you being a student and using this in class, whether it's a unit quiz or a graded in-class assignment. Just keep that in mind. So I will be doing out loud thinking as your role model, as the ideal student to get to correct answers. Okay, so Coach C says that she wants me to analyze a passage. She said it's a simple argument. Oh, that's right. She gave us the definition for simple argument. She said that a simple argument is one that has only one conclusion. Since it is an argument, I should review the definition for argument. So a simple argument is a set of statements, or at least one statement, A premise is given in support of another statement, a conclusion. So I am going to be looking at a passage that has at least two statements. I know there might be more than one premise, but other than that, there's no set number. And I know the job of the premise is to try to support the conclusion. So I need to think about which statements are trying to support the conclusion. Let me go ahead and see if maybe there is something else that I can use from my notes. Well, she did say that we can look out for these words and phrases, and that these words could be telling us whether something is a premise and whether something is a conclusion. So I'll definitely want to keep these handy. I also have to remember that she said that these words don't always function as a premise indicator, and that these words don't always function as a conclusion indicator, but that they often do. All right, so with that said, let me try the first example that she's given us to work on. Okay, so, oh yeah, she told us that when we're doing analysis, we're just looking at the structure of an argument. We're just looking at the different parts to see if a passage has all the parts. Well, she's already told me this is an argument. She's labeled it an argument. She's not asking me whether it's an argument. So I know that and I can see that there are at least two statements. Since she's telling me this is an argument, I also know that by definition, which I just reviewed, that at least one of these is a premise and at least one of these is a conclusion. So, let me read the argument. If President Biden stole the election, then we should allow Trump to take his rightful place as president. Therefore, we should allow Trump to take his rightful place as president. I can't believe she's talking about President Biden stealing the election. That's just another Biden hater. It's probably some Trump zealot. I hate this kind of thinking. But if I'm going to analyze this argument properly, I have to put my own feelings and emotions aside, and I have to really try to understand where this person is coming from, even though it kind of irritates me and makes me a little bit angry. I think this is ridiculous, but I want to get a good grade and show her that I can do argument analysis objectively and not allow my emotions to get in the way. Therefore, I will apply the definition objectively. All right, so it looks like she's already telling me where a statement is. Okay, commercial break. Guys, when we first start analyzing arguments, and even throughout the semester, I will sometimes tell you where a statement begins and ends. So do not create any new statements when I've already given you let you know how many statements there are. I let you know how many statements there are and where each one is by giving you the numbers. So one thing that a student could do that would be wrong is they could try to add a number to this and then change this to 3 because they think that's a second statement. But if that's the case, what has that student done? They have ignored my lesson on what? Conditional statements, how I say you should never chop them in half, and how they are unified whole. Okay, so keep that in mind. All right, so that would be a mistake. You cannot do that. All right, not only that, if a student did do that, and I have seen students do that, they forget the lesson, they haven't reviewed their notes enough times before class or while working on this assignment to remember that you can't chop these in half. But also remember what I said just now. If I already have numbers in a passage, then you already know how many statements there are. You see number 1 and number 2, so you know there's 2 statements here. Okay, I'm going to go back into student mode. All right. Okay, therefore, it sounds like therefore might be a conclusion indicator. We should allow Trump to take his rightful place as president. Okay, even though I think that's ridiculous, I'm going to note that this word therefore, this does seem like this might be something that someone might want to try to convince me of, that they're trying to prove. And I feel like I saw the word therefore. Let me see if that word therefore is anywhere in my notes. Maybe it's a conclusion. Therefore, it's typically a conclusion indicator. Okay, so now I'm going to tentatively label this as with a C, meaning conclusion. Okay, now, if this is an argument, it's a simple argument, has only one conclusion, then I know that the other statement must be functioning as a what? As the premise. So I'll label that P. Okay. So now I have the argument labeled. Statement 1 is a premise. Statement 2 is a conclusion. She says that anytime we analyze an argument, we have to give an argument pattern. So what was that? Okay, so an argument pattern is going to look like this for simple arguments. So which argument pattern might be in here? Well, it looks like we have a premise. In fact, let me label it because she likes us to label stuff. So argument pattern, okay, is there's at least one premise, because she said P means at least one. Then she said I should use the dash to mean followed by, and then I'll write the letter C to mean conclusion. So the argument pattern for argument 1 is premise followed by conclusion. Okay, guys, I've just role modeled to you how you would apply the definition for argument and what you have learned about conclusion indicators to analyze an argument. At this point, we are going to add some notes to our lecture notes, and then we'll do a new video for arguments 2 and 3 where I'll have you practice applying. I encourage you not to touch these arguments because I have a very controlled way of leading you Socratically through this, so I hope you'll wait to do those. Okay, so we're going to end this video by adding some notes. The notes are going to have to do with how you mark up the argument. Notice where I place the letter P and where I place the letter C. You need to have the C here and you need to have the P here. What does this markup tell us about a rule for how we mark where a given premise or conclusion is? Okay, so that is going to go here. So let's keep drawing this line down here. And then maybe cut this rectangle in half right here. And we're going to have right here labeling statements. Okay. Write the abbreviation for the statements function above and at the beginning of a given statement. Okay, so of course P, and leave room here. Leave at least half this room because we're going to need this for other labeling instructions later. So P, of course, means premise, and C, of course, means conclusion. And of course, you now have an example of this. If you do not have the statements in the correct place, I'm not going to count the answer as correct. For example, sometimes students will put it at the end. So if you put P here, I might think you're labeling this. And I don't even know what you think the answer is, what you think this is functioning as, until I get to over here. Sometimes students will put the label just below. But if you did that with premise, for example, let's say you put premise, you think that this is a premise. You're like, okay, this whole statement right here is a premise. You put P there. I'm going to think that you're labeling the conclusion as a premise. So what this does is making sure that we mark up passages in the exact same way. It reduces confusion on my part. It means that we are all using the same system and method, and it makes it more efficient for us to communicate with each other what the answer is when it comes to doing either a collaborative argument analysis or your own argument analysis during a unit quiz or even during individual argument analysis during class. So it is a rule. It is an absolute must that labels go above. And of course, there wasn't a whole lot of room here, so I kind of put it out to the side. We could have put it maybe more right here. Since this is in the way, we could have put it right here. So we have premise and conclusion. Again, both are above the statement that is being labeled and at the beginning. Note that in this case, I did put the conclusion indicator in front of the statement number, but this conclusion indicator, because there's a comma and there's a capital T, still goes with statement 2. This is the core of the statement. This word just signals to us that perhaps a conclusion is coming. This word does not go with the statement before it, even though you have the number 2 after therefore, and even though you have the number 1 before therefore. So again, You still have to use your critical thinking skills, your basic reading comprehension to make sure that you're using the lessons correctly. All right, so I'm going to start a new video for the next two examples, and then we'll be done.